try it once?
Sir, आगे कर दीजिए, माइक्रोफोन आगे कर दीजिए।
Is this mic working?
नहीं, माइक्रोफोन क्लोज।
Or is it echoing? I would hate you to be subjected to first of all my talk and then its echo. Okay? Alright, let me begin by saying that universities all over the world today are in crisis. And in some ways, our crisis in ex-colonial countries that are now nation states is somewhat greater because we carry the whole baggage of a colonial understanding of what a university should be, which we have tried to liberate ourselves from in the last 70 years. And my contention is that we haven't succeeded yet in liberating ourselves from this colonial baggage. Now, I won't go into the details of the crisis, but I would simply like to make one slightly nostalgic statement, which is that none of you were born in 1968. You were? Good. That makes two of us. In 1968, the universities virtually everywhere in the world faced a crisis. And that crisis was resolved by very active participation of faculty and students in changing the curriculum and the structure of universities. And if we have benefited from that, it is precisely because of the activities that took place then. And I think that maybe we are now approaching a similar kind of crisis in which the attempt to change the university into a different kind of institution is an attempt which has to be looked at very carefully, analyzed, and where necessary opposed, and where necessary conceded. So it is a situation in which much more attention has to be given to what is happening to universities today. The point at which I'd like to start is to say that when we talk about universities and university education, please let's not forget that the university is the outcome of a long period of schooling that the student goes through. The schooling is as important as university education. And I'm totally in disagreement with this idea that you set up 15 new central universities across the country and you will solve the problem. You will do nothing of the kind. Until, in fact, you improve the teaching and the attitudes towards education at the level of the school. Now, this means various things. It means teaching students how to think, telling them that the purpose of education is to know how to think. Teaching students how to ask questions. They must ask questions. Questions are absolutely essential to the education process. And also inculcating in students that there is such a thing as being a worthwhile citizen. That is, that when you become an adult, you should be the kind of adult that your society says you're worth having in society. And this is, of course, a rather problematic issue because people have different ideas of what is the ideal citizen. Nevertheless, I'm using the term a worthwhile citizen, a concerned citizen. What does this mean at school stage? It means, first of all, you have to train your teachers. The majority of teachers in schools couldn't care a damn about what they're teaching or how they're teaching or who they're teaching. They do their job. That's all that matters. So it is important to do some kind of inculcation of ideas, values, training at the level of training teachers who teach in school. This has never been done in this country with a perspective of actually changing attitudes in schools. And I think it desperately needs to be done. Textbooks is another issue. It's an issue on which some of us have been fighting all our lives. described when we go into remote parts of the country as, oh, these are the people who are constantly agitating about textbooks. Yes, we are constantly agitating about textbooks, and why? Let me give you a little personal experience of this. In 1963, I had just started teaching at Delhi University, coming to the profession very fresh with a PhD and 2 years teaching experience. When I was asked if I would do the textbooks for middle schools, and I was asked by Professor R.C. Majumdar, who was then chairman of the NCERT Committee on Textbooks. And at first I thought, what nonsense, I'm back here to do research at the university level. I'm not writing textbooks for 12 and 13-year-olds. Then I thought about it and thought about it and talked to friends. And finally I said, yes, I'll do it. Now why did I say yes? I said yes because we were all at that stage in 1963, please remember. We were all people who were deeply influenced by a certain kind of nationalism. Now, nationalism has become a very dicey word today. It can mean anything under the sun. It's become a mask behind which people claim to do things and say things that have nothing to do with nationalism. Nationalism today has a typology. We no longer talk about nationalism, we talk about types of nationalism. So you've got white nationalism in the US, you have what was called black nationalism in Africa, you've got religious nationalism in India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, and you have language nationalisms in Eastern Europe. It goes on multiplying, tribal, caste, everything that needs any kind of description. So nationalism now needs a qualifier. And if you say that someone is being anti-national, and Jane, who knows this only too well, you have to qualify what kind of anti-national that person is being. It's not enough just to say so-and-so is anti-national. That's a mask. That doesn't make too much sense. So in 1963, the nationalism that we had grown up with in our previous years in school and college was the nationalism that brought us independence. It was the nationalism on the basis of which we were trying to build the Indian nation state, namely a nationalism based on secularism and democracy. Those were the two essential components of that nationalism. And so when some of us decided to write these textbooks, we wrote them with the intention that A, we have to convey knowledge to students, so textbooks shouldn't be boring. The usual thing that is said about history textbooks is they are like telephone directories. You have all the dates on one side and you have events against those dates on the other side. That's not a textbook. So what we were concerned with was taking up historical problems and analyzing them a little bit and talking, explaining them and talking about how these situations arose and what happened as well. Making it a little more interesting. So that was one thing. How do you bring history alive? By making it something relevant to people. And that is not just something that applies to history, it applies to all knowledge. All knowledge in textbooks has to be relevant to society. The other problem with writing those textbooks, and so we decided that that was one issue, and the second issue was that they were to be textbooks that talked about every section of society. They were not to be a recital of elite achievements. They were to bring in every section from top to bottom and talk about what they were doing. And this was what we tried to do in these very early textbooks. Very, very difficult. I must confess that it was the toughest assignment I've ever had in my life. Because when you're writing for children, especially 12 and 13-year-olds who are just beginning to ask questions, just beginning to get conscious of the world, you can't talk down to them. You have to talk to them woman to woman. And the other thing that's very important is, of course, that you have to know the subject extremely well in order to write a textbook that is readable, accessible, interesting. Otherwise, what you're writing is really a very boring book. My attempt, therefore, in my two little textbooks that I wrote in 1963 and 64, was to write a history that was inclusive, absolutely inclusive, therefore national. And it had its own problems, but one tried to answer them as best one could. And then, of course, came the great battle over the textbooks in the first NDA government, where attempts were being made to put fake history into the books, and we were resisting that and arguing against it. And, of course, the trouble with putting in fake history is that it cuts out the attempt to make history legitimate, or any subject for that matter. There's a problem of legitimacy in that subject. We thought at that stage that one of the problems is that the NCRT was under the control of government, and therefore it would do whatever the government says. And the butt of jokes at that, now particularly, is that each time the government changes, the textbooks change. This is absolutely ridiculous in educational terms. You've got to have textbooks that are there for a good 20 years or so. And the changes come not because the government changes, the changes come because there's a change in the discipline. There are new ways of looking at history or sociology or civics or whatever your textbook is about. Some of us did try in 2005 to liberate the NCERT from government control, and we wrote extensively and spoke extensively about how textbook writing should not be under any kind of government control. It should be in the hands of professionals. But of course we failed, and we failed partly because governments were not anxious to give up their control over textbooks, and partly because our own academic professionals were not terribly interested in textbooks. School textbooks were not so important. But there was a group that then developed which took it much more seriously and produced excellent textbooks, which are now, of course, under attack, naturally, because the government under which they were written changed, and we have a government with a very different idea of what history is all about. Then there is a problem of the medium of instruction, which is again something that we rapidly push under the carpet and say, no, somehow people will manage, it doesn't really matter. This is a very fundamental problem, and I think that we need to discuss it and debate it much, much more than we do, both in universities, in schools, and in government offices dealing with educational institutions. What does a medium of instruction mean? It means that it gives you a medium which conveys to you, which enables you to access knowledge, and which also gives you an attitude towards knowledge. And please remember, the two things are very important to this. One thing is to say, I know this because I have got it from this source. It's another thing to say, I know what this means to me and my society. That's a different story. And these two processes are absolutely essential in any kind of education. Now, my own feeling about the language issue is that the only solution in our day and age today, in the 21st century, is to introduce bilingualism. And I say this because I think that there is a difference today between the language of socialization for a young student, how that child grows up in the family, the society, and becomes a member of that society. What language is used can be a very different language from the language of education, where this is a language of learning. Now, if there is a difference, the only way to bridge that difference is to have bilingualism, where the language of socialization and the language of education are taught together and are taught where they can interface with each other, borrow from each other, and influence each other, as indeed does happen wherever you have elements of bilingualism in education in this country. It is particularly important to have this kind of interface, and it's particularly important also to have a medium of the regional language and preferably English, because English has become, the world over, the language of advanced knowledge. And this is where, for example, one sees all kinds of bifurcations. People insisting that they would not learn two languages, which is their mistake, because in fact two languages are very useful. They feed into each other, they nurture each other, and it becomes an important way in which knowledge goes from one language to another, as it must do. It's also helpful in another area that we suffer from very badly: the split between the scientists and the humanists. There are scientists today, the majority of scientists, who are totally unfamiliar with what is done in the study of the humanities. They have not read a poem or a novel or any other text of literary criticism or any other text of that kind, history of sociology or whatever it may be. And there are social scientists who read all these texts and are totally unfamiliar with scientific thinking. There is a divide. And that divide is extremely unfortunate, because the thing is that you cannot split knowledge into knowledge for scientists and knowledge for humanists. The knowledge has to be the same thing. And one of the ways in which I think this can be done much more effectively is if there is bilingualism, and where people are talking both the language of their socialization and the language of their education. All right, so much for the general background. Let me turn to a couple of points about the university in particular. What did we set out to do when we set up JNU? I joined JNU in 1970, and we got working in 1971, and we started having courses and limiting students at the end of the middle of 1971. We set up a university which we thought would be a pace-making, a pace-setting university. Why was this important? It was important because not every university in any country, not all universities can be pace-setting universities. There are some which have to be slightly more ahead in advance of others. If you can have them all at the same level, nothing like it, but that is somewhat realistic. So we set up this university, and we absolutely sweated our guts out, as they say, those of us in the beginning, who thought this thing through and got it going, and within about 10 or 15 years, we were being talked of as not only nationally but internationally a university of very high quality, which pleased us no end, because we thought that was what we'd set out to do. At the same time, one's regret, and I must confess it breaks my heart every time I come to JNU and get into conversation with students and faculty to hear what is happening. It has taken hardly 3 years to unscramble our efforts, almost, and change the function of the JNU as a pace-setting university. The techniques are very simple. They're the same techniques that are employed by every state all over the world when it wishes to unscramble an institution. You recruit poor quality people. You make it very difficult for the students to maintain themselves. You deflect the content of education when they end up by knowing virtually little or nothing about the subject. You disallow faculty from attending international conferences because you don't want any kind of international knowledge. You don't want people internationally to know what you're doing to your university. And the kinds of ridiculous statements that are made these days by people in the know, that the PhD subject must be a subject that is in conformity with national concerns. Please, what are these national concerns? Can we please first have a debate and a discussion and decide on what these concerns are before we start restricting research and saying, no, you can't do research on that, you can only do it on this. This is not research. This is not what a university is meant for. So anyway, that is the fear that is there, not only in JU, but in many universities. Because remember that once you have been a pace-setting university, what happens to you and the kinds of attacks that are made on the academic program in your university have a rebounding effect on every other university. There are always very intelligent, sensitive people, students and faculty in other universities who say, oh my God, this is going to come our way as well. This is going to happen to us as well. So that is something which is necessary to keep that in mind. Remember, of course, that universities are not, let me repeat, government institutions. We may be financed by the government, but that doesn't mean that we are part of the bureaucracy of government functioning. The essence of a university, and here I would like to say that after 1968, one talks about two essential features of the university, not just one. One is the relationship that the university has with society. Very crucial, very important. Who are the people from society that are coming to the university? Does everybody have a right? Does every citizen of your state have a right to school and university education, as they should have? And if they don't have that right, what is the way in which governance can be made to give that right to every citizen of the country? The second aspect of the university is, of course, understanding knowledge. That's what people are here for, whether it's school or university at a more advanced level. So, there has to be an investigation of the various aspects of both the social segments that are being brought into the university, that are being given the opportunity to learn, whether they belong to the top sections of society or they belong to the lower sections of society, and the interface in the different kinds of knowledge that a university is handling. There is a methodology in all knowledge, and it is that methodology that we've been chasing in JU and that we have brought to fruition about 20, 30 years ago. That in every field there is a methodology, and therefore that methodology has to be observed. The methodology teaches you how to reach knowledge. It doesn't tell you necessarily that this is the knowledge that you must have and no other knowledge. It's the openness which is absolutely important. And one of these methodologies is, of course, what is generally called the dialectical method. And I'm not referring only to the dialectical method of the 19th century, but remember that way back, the early Greeks and the early Indians all used a dialectical method of thinking in order to approach knowledge. What is the proposition? What is the opposition to that proposition? How do we debate this? And how do we come to a conclusion if we have to come to a conclusion? This is absolutely essential. It is a rational process of knowledge, and every university has to incorporate this process. I must confess again, if I may be autobiographical, that intellectually, the most exciting experience in my life has been the initial years that I spent at JU, 1970s to the end of that century, working out new courses of a kind that were not being taught anywhere else. They were semester, we sat and did brainstorming day after day after day and said, we will not repeat the courses that are being taught in every other university. We will not repeat the courses that we think are not advanced enough, that are not giving us a chance to investigate and explore knowledge. So this kind of brainstorming had an extremely deep influence on the shaping of my own approach to history, because every time I came up with a new idea for let's put this topic into this course, I had to defend it, and defend it fully with this group of a dozen people, very sharp historians, saying, why do you want to put it in? So it's an exercise in explaining to yourself and to others why particular bodies of knowledge are extremely important. And because we were emphasizing interdisciplinary thinking, which in our days, in my days at least, was a very key factor in the way courses were worked out, hopefully it still is, it was terribly exciting to be reading historians who were reading other kinds of books in the social sciences, not necessarily just history. And I remember as a historian of ancient India, dealing with a society that was not contemporary and not modern, but a different kind of society, I found reading on social anthropology extremely useful. Because social anthropologists also deal with societies that are not modern contemporary societies, but are different. And so this kind of going back and forth in time, going back and forth in space, looking at different kinds of societies, was a tremendous learning experience, which I enjoyed very much indeed. And that is what helped us also to move pre-modern history, for example, from Indology to the social sciences. And what was the major difference? The good Indologist was a person who sat and carefully brought out all the information possible from a source, usually a text. Fine, I have no quarrel with that, I think it's excellent. A lot of the work done by early Indologists was excellent. But what was not done was to take that information into the mold of other disciplines and to ask questions of a different kind from that same evidence. The analysis of society, which is crucial for any social science, was something that only came when history moved from Indology into the social sciences. And students then, our students, were taught to question existing knowledge as well as its application, and to separate meaningful questions from irrelevant questions. This is a very important exercise. You don't just ask questions. You ask questions that lead you from one thing to the next, and that open up the world towards you. The university, therefore, for us, for me, for my generation, is of the essence of the university is that a place that is constantly open to discussion, debate, analysis, inquiry. It is a place where you let off steam, social steam and intellectual steam, and see where it goes and how it goes and who takes it up and who leaves it, and etc., etc. It is a place where all of this happens. Nothing is objectionable that can be discussed. Every topic under the sun had to be debated. And as somebody said, if you didn't debate it in the classroom, you debated it in the Ganga Dhaba. But whatever the location was, the debate was absolutely an essential factor. And the university, let us not forget, is very special just for this. It is the only institution in modern society where this kind of open debate and discussion is not only permitted, but is required. It's required, and I am familiar with those. What new sources of information come in to illuminate a subject where you would have never thought that source would have anything to do with the subject? Let me give you an example. Currently, if you read the newspapers, there is a debate going on genetics and DNA and what it tells us about the Indian population at various periods of time. This is being crucially debated by historians, particularly, and by others, by the general public, interested, for example, in the Vedic period. Because the question that various people, non-historians, have been asking repeatedly is, where did the Aryans originate? And the theory that is currently popular in official circles is that they all originated in the Indian subcontinent. How you define the boundaries of the subcontinent is irrelevant, because most of these are British Indian boundaries, but never mind. There's vaguely somewhere in India. Now, what the DNA evidence is telling you, that the population of India in 2000 BC, just about when the Rig Veda was beginning to be composed, we assume, or a little later, there were three categories of people: the indigenous Indians, the West Iranians, and the Central Asians. So already you have a situation where you can no longer say that this period of Indian history was a period when you did not have a mixed population coming from different directions. Now, this is one of those lovely instances where the good Vedic Sanskrit scholar has to be in dialogue with the geneticist. You would never think these two disciplines would ever come together, but they are there, and they have to be speaking to each other because of the evidence that is being produced. Universities, of course, are not meant for just the rich and the elite, as are many of our private universities today. The enrollment has to go beyond that, and it has to go beyond that for two reasons. One is, of course, the reason that, democratic society must have students from every section of social stratification, which is absolutely correct. Historically, the second reason, historically, whenever education in a society makes a quantum leap and does something new and different and advances, it is usually because some new segment of society has been brought into the process of education. And this is something that we must keep in mind. It's not only a question of righting social injustice, it is also a question of the way in which knowledge grows, functions, and has to be nurtured. Finally, a university is not an ivory tower. It has to be in dialogue with all segments of society, of the society in which it is located. It has to be in dialogue with all these segments. These are dialogues that can be exploratory, they can be explanatory, but they must always convey the concern that the university has for the society in which it is located. That concern is crucial, that dialogue is absolutely crucial. Academics as intellectuals are not distant beings. We are very much a part of the society from which we come from, whether as faculty or as students. And we have to keep this in mind all the time, irrespective of which body of knowledge we may be chasing. And also keep in mind the fact that in the chasing of knowledge, we are in fact all the time in touch with social requirements and needs, because the two are connected. We are very much part of a society and as such committed to our function in explaining ourselves to society. We have to justify ourselves to society because we're claiming all these rights, we're claiming all these exceptions, so we have to justify ourselves to society. And in this process, explain society to itself. People don't always understand what the institutions that go into the making up of the society actually mean and the function they have. And it is for us to explain this to them, a very essential feature of university functioning. And if, in a situation where this mutual commitment of the university society and of the society to the university begins to fade, as it seems to me it is currently beginning to do, if it has not already done, it has to be reignited, both in the university